My topic is price gouging in detail. Explain, and let's go to the topic and let's go to the start. Price gouging is a practice wherein a seller or a business raises the price of goods or services to an unreasonable or exorbitant level during a time of crisis, such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other shortages. This is often seen as unethical, as it takes advantage of vulnerable individuals who may have no other choice but to pay the inflated prices. Many jurisdictions have enacted laws to protect consumers from price gouging during such times, and penalties can be severe for those who engage in this practice. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of crisis or emergency when the demand for those items is increased. It typically occurs when there is a limited supply of essential goods, such as food, water, fuel, or medical supplies, and sellers take advantage of the situation by significantly raising prices to maximize their profits. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and exploitative, as it preys on vulnerable individuals who are in urgent need of essential items. It can occur in various forms, including online marketplaces, physical stores, or even in the provision of services like home repairs or transportation during emergencies. Many jurisdictions have laws in place to protect consumers from price gouging. These laws typically define what constitutes price gouging, specify the conditions under which it is prohibited, and establish penalties for violators. The specific regulations and penalties vary from country to country and even within different states or regions. During times of crisis, governments often take measures to prevent or address price gouging. They may implement price controls or price freeze mechanisms to stabilize prices and ensure fair access to essential goods. Additionally, public awareness campaigns and reporting systems are sometimes established to encourage consumers to report instances of price gouging. If you suspect price gouging is occurring, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate authorities, such as consumer protection agencies or local law enforcement, depending on the regulations in your jurisdiction. They can investigate the situation and take appropriate action against those engaging in price gouging. It's important to note that price increases in response to normal market conditions, such as changes in supply and demand or changes in production costs, are generally considered legitimate business practices. Price gouging specifically refers to exploitative price increases during times of crisis or emergency. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessive or unfair prices for goods or services during times of high demand or emergency situations. It typically occurs when sellers take advantage of limited supplies or increased demand to maximize their profits. Price gouging can occur during natural disasters, pandemics, or other events that disrupt the normal functioning of the market. Laws regarding price gouging vary from country to country and even within different regions or states. In some jurisdictions, price gouging is explicitly prohibited and can result in legal consequences for businesses or individuals engaging in such practices. These laws are often in place to protect consumers from exploitation during times of crisis. The ethics of price gouging are a subject of debate. Supporters argue that higher prices incentivize suppliers to increase production and ensure the goods are available to those who value them the most. They also argue that price increases can prevent hoarding and promote the efficient allocation of resources. On the other hand, critics argue that price gouging takes advantage of vulnerable individuals and creates an unfair situation where only those with greater financial means can afford essential goods. Overall, price gouging is generally frowned upon and considered unethical by many people, particularly when it exploits individuals in vulnerable situations. It is important for governments and regulatory bodies to monitor and enforce laws to prevent price gouging, especially during times of crisis when the well-being of the population may be at stake. Price gouging can harm the public by making essential goods and services unaffordable and exacerbating the effects of a crisis. For example, during a natural disaster, price gouging may prevent people from obtaining necessities such as food, water, and medical supplies. During a pandemic, price gouging may result in a shortage of medical equipment and protective gear, putting healthcare professionals and the public at risk. Price gouging can also lead to a breakdown in the market system. Prices that are too high may lead to panic buying and hoarding, which can exacerbate shortages. It may also lead to black market activities, as people seek to obtain goods and services at more reasonable prices. In addition to legal penalties, Price gouging can also damage a business's reputation and consumer trust. Consumers may remember businesses that engage in price gouging and be less likely to do business with them in the future. Overall, price gouging is a harmful and unethical practice that should be avoided during times of crisis. Businesses should prioritize the well-being of their customers and communities, rather than profiting from their vulnerability. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessive or exorbitant prices for goods or services during times of emergency, crisis, or high demand. It typically occurs when sellers take advantage of a situation where the supply of essential goods or services is limited, and people are willing to pay more due to urgency or scarcity. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and exploitative, taking advantage of vulnerable individuals or communities during difficult times. It can occur during natural disasters, such as hurricanes or earthquakes, or during other emergencies like the current COVID-19 pandemic. Many jurisdictions have laws and regulations in place to prevent price gouging. These laws vary by country and region, but they typically aim to protect consumers from unfair pricing practices during times of crisis. Penalties for price gouging can include fines, legal action, or other enforcement measures. It's important to note that price increases in response to legitimate market forces, such as changes in supply and demand, are not necessarily considered price gouging. Price gouging specifically refers to unreasonable and exploitative pricing practices during exceptional circumstances. If you suspect price gouging is occurring, you should report it to the appropriate authorities in your jurisdiction, such as consumer protection agencies, local law enforcement, or consumer affairs departments. They can investigate the matter and take necessary actions to address the issue. Governments can play a role in preventing price gouging by implementing laws and regulations to protect consumers during times of crisis. This may include price controls, limits on quantities that can be sold, and penalties for businesses that engage in price gouging. Consumers can also play a role in preventing price gouging by being informed and reporting any instances of price gouging to authorities or consumer protection agencies. Ultimately, it is important for businesses and governments to work together to ensure that essential goods and services are accessible and affordable during times of crisis. Price gouging only serves to exacerbate the effects of a crisis and harm those who are already vulnerable. Price gouging refers to the practice of raising prices excessively or unreasonably during times of crisis or high demand, often taking advantage of consumers' urgent needs or limited options. It is generally considered an unethical and exploitative behavior. During emergencies such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other situations that disrupt regular supply chains, certain goods and services may become scarce, leading to an increase in demand. Price gouging occurs when sellers significantly inflate the prices of these goods or services beyond what would be considered fair or reasonable. The exact definition and legality of price gouging vary from country to country and even within different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions have specific laws and regulations in place to protect consumers from price gouging, while others rely on general consumer protection laws or rely on market forces to address the issue. Price gouging can affect various essential items, including food, water, medical supplies, fuel, accommodation, and other goods or services that are necessary for survival or recovery during a crisis. The practice is often seen as taking advantage of vulnerable individuals or communities who have limited alternatives during emergencies. It's worth noting that price increases due to factors such as increased production costs or scarcity of resources are not necessarily considered price gouging if they can be justified. For example, if the cost of raw materials increases significantly, a reasonable price increase may be warranted. However, determining what constitutes price gouging can sometimes be a subjective judgment. If you suspect price gouging or believe you have been a victim of it, you should report the issue to your local consumer protection agency or authorities. They can provide guidance on the specific laws and regulations in your area and take appropriate action against the offenders. It's important for both businesses and consumers to be aware of and understand the laws and regulations regarding price gouging in their respective jurisdictions. Responsible pricing practices and fair treatment of consumers are crucial, particularly during times of crisis when people are most vulnerable and in need. Price gouging refers to the practice of raising the prices of goods or services to unfair, excessive, or exploitative levels during times of crisis, situations where the demand for those goods or services is high. It typically occurs when there is a limited supply of essential items, such as food, water, fuel, or medical supplies, and sellers take advantage of the situation by significantly increasing their prices. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and, in many jurisdictions, it is also illegal. Laws and regulations regarding price gouging vary by country and region, but they are typically put in place to protect consumers from exploitation during times of vulnerability. These laws often define specific criteria for what constitutes price gouging, such as the percentage increase in prices or the comparison to pre-existing market prices. Price gouging laws are intended to ensure that consumers have access to essential goods and services at fair and reasonable prices during emergencies or crises. They aim to prevent unscrupulous sellers from taking advantage of desperate or vulnerable individuals who may have limited options or resources. If you suspect price gouging, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate authorities in your area, such as consumer protection agencies or local law enforcement. They can investigate the situation and take appropriate action if necessary. Price gouging refers to the practice of increasing the prices of goods or services to an excessive or unfair level, typically in response to a high demand or a supply shortage during emergencies or crises. It takes advantage of the vulnerable situation of consumers who urgently need essential items or services. While price gouging is often criticized for exploiting consumers during difficult times, it is important to note that determining what constitutes price gouging can be subjective. Prices naturally fluctuate based on supply and demand, and it can be challenging to distinguish between legitimate market forces and exploitative practices. Laws regarding price gouging vary by jurisdiction. Some countries and states have specific regulations in place to prohibit or regulate price gouging during emergencies or disasters. These laws typically define price gouging and set limits on price increases or provide guidelines to identify unfair and exploitative pricing practices. Penalties for price gouging can range from fines to legal actions. During times of crisis, such as natural disasters or public health emergencies, price gouging can occur with essential items like food, water, fuel, medicine, or accommodation. It is generally viewed as unethical and harmful to consumers who are already facing difficulties. Governments and regulatory authorities often take measures to protect consumers and ensure fair pricing practices during such situations. If you suspect price gouging, you can report it to the appropriate authorities in your jurisdiction. They can investigate the matter and take appropriate action if necessary. It's important to note that as an AI language model, I don't have real-time information about specific incidents of price gouging or the current regulations in various regions. Therefore, it is always recommended to consult local authorities or legal resources for the most up-to-date and accurate information regarding price gouging in your specific area. Furthermore, businesses can choose to act ethically and prioritize the needs of their customers over profit during times of crisis. This can include offering discounts, donating goods and services, and ensuring that essential items remain affordable and readily available. Additionally, transparency in pricing and supply chains can help prevent price gouging by allowing consumers to make informed decisions and hold businesses accountable for their pricing practices. In summary, preventing price gouging during times of crisis requires a collaborative effort between businesses, governments, and consumers. By implementing and enforcing regulations, promoting ethical business practices, and prioritizing the needs of consumers, we can ensure that everyone has access to essential goods and services during difficult times. Price gouging refers to the act of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of crisis or emergency when the demand for those goods or services exceeds the supply. It typically occurs during events such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other situations where there is a sudden increase in demand and limited availability of essential items. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and is often regulated or prohibited by laws in many jurisdictions. These laws are intended to protect consumers from exploitation during vulnerable times and ensure that essential goods and services remain reasonably priced and accessible to the general public. The specific regulations and laws regarding price gouging vary across different countries and regions. In some cases, price gouging may be defined based on a certain percentage increase above the pre-crisis price, while in others, it may be assessed based on what is considered an unconscionable or unreasonable price. Penalties for price gouging can also vary but may include fines, injunctions, or other legal actions to prevent further exploitation of consumers. It's important to note that price increases due to genuine factors such as increased production costs or limited supply may not be considered price gouging if they can be justified and are not deemed exploitative. If you suspect price gouging is occurring in your area, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate consumer protection agency or local authorities. They will be able to investigate the matter and take appropriate action if necessary. Price gouging refers to the practice of raising the prices of goods or services to an excessively high level, typically during times of crisis or emergency when the demand for those goods or services is significantly increased. This can occur after natural disasters, during pandemics, or during other situations where demand outstrips supply. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and exploitative. It takes advantage of consumers who are in vulnerable situations and can lead to significant financial burdens or difficulties in obtaining essential goods and services. Many jurisdictions have laws and regulations in place to prevent price gouging and protect consumers during times of crisis. Laws regarding price gouging vary by country and even within different regions or states. In some jurisdictions, price gouging is explicitly prohibited and carries legal penalties. These laws typically define what constitutes price gouging, set limits on price increases, and outline the enforcement mechanisms. However, the specific regulations and their application can vary, so it's important to consult the laws of your particular jurisdiction to understand the rules and protections in place. If you believe you have encountered price gouging or suspect unfair pricing practices, it's advisable to report the issue to the relevant authorities, such as consumer protection agencies, local government departments, or law enforcement agencies. They can investigate the matter and take appropriate action if necessary. It's worth noting that price increases due to normal market forces, such as changes in supply and demand or fluctuations in production costs, are not considered price gouging. Price gouging specifically refers to exploitative practices that take advantage of emergencies or crisis situations. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging exorbitant or excessively high prices for goods or services during times of crisis or emergency when demand significantly exceeds supply. It typically occurs in situations such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other events that disrupt the normal functioning of the market. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and exploitative because it takes advantage of vulnerable individuals who are in desperate need of essential goods or services. It can include a wide range of products such as food, water, fuel, medical supplies, and accommodation. By inflating prices, sellers can significantly increase their profits at the expense of consumers who have limited alternatives. Many jurisdictions have laws and regulations in place to prevent or combat price gouging. These laws vary across different countries and regions, but they generally aim to protect consumers during times of crisis. The specific regulations typically define price gouging, establish criteria for determining excessive prices, and set penalties for violators. Enforcement may involve fines, injunctions, or other legal actions against businesses engaged in price gouging. It's important to note that in regular market conditions, prices are determined by supply and demand dynamics, and businesses are generally free to set their prices according to their own judgment. However, during emergencies or crises, there is often a need for additional protection to prevent price gouging and ensure access to essential goods and services for all individuals affected by the situation. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of emergency or crisis when the demand for those goods or services is high and supplies are limited. It typically occurs when there is a disruption in the market, such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other emergencies. Price gouging is widely considered unethical and exploitative, taking advantage of vulnerable individuals or communities in desperate situations. It often results in the unaffordability of essential items like food, water, medicine, fuel, and shelter, making it difficult for people to meet their basic needs. Many jurisdictions have laws and regulations in place to prevent price gouging during emergencies. These laws vary by country and region, but they typically prohibit sellers from charging excessively high prices or implementing during a crisis. The specific definitions of price gouging and the penalties associated with it differ from one jurisdiction to another. It is important to note that legitimate price increases can occur during emergencies due to increased production costs, transportation difficulties, or supply chain disruptions. However, Price gouging involves exploiting the situation unreasonably and taking advantage of the necessity or desperation of individuals. If you suspect price gouging is taking place, you should report it to the appropriate authorities in your jurisdiction, such as consumer protection agencies, local law enforcement, or the Attorney General's office. They can investigate the matter and take appropriate actions to address the issue. Please note that while I strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, my knowledge cutoff is in September 2021, and specific regulations or laws regarding price gouging may have changed since then. It's always a good idea to consult the relevant authorities or legal resources in your jurisdiction for the most current information. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of crisis or emergency. This can happen during natural disasters, pandemics, or other situations where demand for certain products or services exceeds the supply. Price gouging is often seen as unethical because it takes advantage of people who are in a vulnerable situation and can afford to pay inflated prices. In many cases, it is also illegal and can result in fines or other penalties for businesses that engage in it. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of crisis or emergency when the normal market conditions are disrupted. It typically occurs when demand for essential goods and services exceeds supply, leading to a shortage and an opportunity for sellers to take advantage of the situation by significantly increasing prices. While price gouging can be seen in various contexts, it is commonly associated with natural disasters, such as hurricanes or earthquakes, public health emergencies, such as pandemics, or other events that disrupt regular market functioning. Basic necessities like food, water, shelter, medical supplies, gasoline, or lodging are often subject to price gouging during these situations. Price gouging is widely considered unethical and exploitative because it takes advantage of people's vulnerability and immediate needs. It can harm consumers who are already facing difficulties due to the crisis by making essential goods and services unaffordable. Additionally, price gouging can lead to hoarding and further exacerbate the shortage problem. Many jurisdictions have laws and regulations in place to protect consumers from price gouging during emergencies. These laws often define specific criteria for what constitutes price gouging, such as an excessive price increase beyond a certain percentage compared to pre-crisis levels. Penalties for price gouging can include fines, civil penalties, and injunctions. If you suspect price gouging is occurring, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate authorities, such as consumer protection agencies or local law enforcement, who can investigate and take appropriate action to address the issue. Price gouging refers to the practice of raising prices significantly on essential goods and services during times of emergency or crisis when the demand for those items is high. It is generally considered unethical and exploitative, taking advantage of people's desperation and vulnerability. Price gouging commonly occurs during natural disasters, such as hurricanes or floods, or during public health emergencies, like the COVID-19 pandemic. Laws regarding price gouging vary from country to country and even within different regions. Many jurisdictions have implemented legislation to protect consumers from price gouging during emergencies. These laws typically define what constitutes price gouging and set penalties for violators. Price gouging can occur both in physical retail stores and online marketplaces. Online platforms have faced particular challenges in preventing price gouging because of the ease with which sellers can manipulate prices and the vast reach they have. It's important to note that price increases due to normal market forces, such as changes in supply and demand, are not considered price gouging. Price gouging specifically refers to excessive and unfair price hikes that take advantage of an emergency situation. If you suspect price gouging, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate authorities in your region, such as consumer protection agencies or local law enforcement. They can investigate the situation and take appropriate action to protect consumers. Price gouging refers to the act of increasing the prices of goods or services to unfair or excessively high levels, typically in response to an emergency or crisis situation when demand is high and supplies are limited. It takes advantage of the scarcity of essential items to maximize profits. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and is often illegal in many jurisdictions. During times of crisis, such as natural disasters or public health emergencies, price gouging can occur for essential goods like food, water, medicine, fuel, or shelter. The increased prices can create difficulties for consumers who are already facing hardships due to the emergency. Laws and regulations against price gouging vary by country and jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions have specific statutes that prohibit price gouging during emergencies, while others rely on general consumer protection laws to address the issue. Penalties for price gouging can include fines, injunctions, and other legal actions. Price gouging is generally seen as detrimental to society because it exploits people's vulnerability during times of crisis. It can hinder access to necessary goods and services, particularly for those with limited financial resources. However, it's important to note that in a free market economy, prices are typically determined by supply and demand, and in normal circumstances, price increases can reflect genuine market dynamics. If you suspect price gouging is occurring in your area, it's advisable to report it to the relevant consumer protection agency or local authorities who can investigate the matter and take appropriate action. Price gouging refers to the practice of excessively raising the prices of goods or services, often during times of high demand or emergency situations. It typically involves taking advantage of consumers' urgent needs or limited options to inflate prices significantly. While there is no universally accepted definition of price gouging, it is generally considered unethical and exploitative. Many jurisdictions have laws in place to protect consumers from price gouging during emergencies, such as natural disasters or public health crises. These laws vary by country and state, but they typically aim to prevent unfair and excessive price increases during times of crisis. Price gouging can occur in various sectors, including essential goods like food, water, medicine, fuel, and housing. It can also occur in non-essential sectors, such as electronics, during periods of high demand. Governments and regulatory bodies often monitor for price gouging and take action against businesses found engaging in such practices. Penalties can range from fines and restitution to legal action and reputational damage. It's important to note that price increases resulting from factors such as increased production costs or changes in supply and demand dynamics are not necessarily considered price gouging. Price gouging specifically refers to exploitative and unfair pricing practices during emergencies or times of crisis. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during times of emergency, crisis, or increased demand. It typically occurs when there is a limited supply of essential items, such as food, water, fuel, or medical supplies, and sellers take advantage of the situation to maximize their profits. Price gouging is widely considered unethical and is often illegal in many jurisdictions. Laws and regulations regarding price gouging vary by country and even within different states or regions. These laws are typically enacted to protect consumers from exploitation during vulnerable times and to ensure fair market conditions. During emergencies such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other crisis situations, price gouging can occur as a result of increased demand and limited supply. Sellers may significantly raise the prices of essential goods, taking advantage of the urgency and necessity of those items for affected individuals or communities. The specific criteria for determining whether a price increase is considered gouging can vary. However, some common factors include the price difference compared to the pre-crisis levels, the extent of the increase, and the prevailing market conditions. Authorities often monitor and investigate reports of price gouging, and penalties may be imposed on violators. It is important to note that regular market dynamics, such as supply and demand fluctuations, do not constitute price gouging. Price increases due to increased costs, transportation issues, or other legitimate factors are generally considered separate from price gouging. Price gouging refers to the act of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during times of crisis or emergencies when the demand for those goods or services significantly exceeds the supply. It typically occurs in situations such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other events that disrupt the normal functioning of the market. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and in many jurisdictions, it is also illegal. Vary from country to country and even within different states or regions. These laws are put in place to protect consumers from unfair and exploitative pricing practices during times of vulnerability. The intention behind such laws is to prevent sellers from taking advantage of the urgent needs or desperation of consumers by artificially inflating prices. Price gouging can occur in various sectors, including essential goods such as food, water, fuel, medical supplies, and accommodation. While the specific definitions and regulations may vary, price gouging is generally understood to involve an unconscionable increase in prices that is not justified by the cost of production or the market conditions. The specific criteria for determining price gouging can include factors like the pre-existing market price, the magnitude of the price increase, and the availability of alternatives for consumers. It's important to note that legitimate increases in prices may occur during times of crisis due to increased production costs, transportation difficulties, or other supply chain disruptions. However, price gouging refers to excessive and unjustified price increases that exploit consumers' urgent needs. If you suspect price gouging, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate authorities, such as consumer protection agencies or local law enforcement, who can investigate and take necessary actions to address the issue. Price gouging refers to the practice of taking advantage of sudden or temporary changes in supply and demand to raise prices for goods or services to levels that are considered unfair or unreasonable. Price gouging can occur during natural disasters, emergencies, or other situations where consumers may be desperate for certain products. It is often considered unethical and can be illegal in some states. Price gouging is the act of charging excessive prices for goods or services during a time of emergency or crisis, when the normal supply and demand balance is disrupted. It is often seen during natural disasters, blackouts, or other situations that lead to shortages of essential products like food, water, and medical supplies. Some examples of price gouging include selling a case of water for $50 during a hurricane, or charging $10 for a single mask during a pandemic. In many states and countries, price gouging is illegal and can result in fines, legal action, or even imprisonment. Price gouging refers to the practice of increasing the prices of essential goods and services, such as food, water, gasoline, and medical supplies, during a time of crisis or emergency. This often occurs during natural disasters, such as hurricanes or earthquakes, or during periods of high demand, such as pandemics or other health emergencies. Price gouging is considered unethical and illegal in many states and countries because it can contribute to economic hardship and exploitation, especially for low-income individuals and vulnerable population. Price gouging is the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of emergency or crisis, such as a natural disaster or pandemic. This is often seen as unethical and exploitative of the situation. Many governments have laws in place to prevent price gouging during emergencies. Price gouging refers to the act of charging excessively high prices for goods or services, typically in response to a situation where demand outstrips supply. It often occurs during emergencies or times of crisis when there is a limited availability of essential items such as food, water, fuel, or medical supplies. Price gouging can take place both in physical retail settings and online marketplaces. While the definition of price gouging can vary by jurisdiction, it is generally considered unethical and, in many cases, illegal. Laws and regulations regarding price gouging vary across different countries and regions. In some places, specific statutes are enacted to protect consumers from price gouging during emergencies or natural disasters. Price gouging can have negative consequences for consumers who may be forced to pay exorbitant prices for essential goods and services. It can also lead to hoarding, market distortions, and inequalities in access to necessary items, particularly for vulnerable populations. Authorities typically monitor and enforce regulations against price gouging during emergencies to protect consumers. If you suspect price gouging is occurring, it is advisable to report it to the appropriate consumer protection agencies or local law enforcement authorities, who can investigate the matter and take appropriate action if necessary. It's worth noting that price increases in response to legitimate factors such as increased production costs or changes in market conditions are not considered price gouging. Price fluctuations driven by normal market forces, competition, or changes in supply and demand are part of regular economic dynamics. Price gouging refers to the practice of charging excessively high prices for goods or services during a time of crisis or emergency when the normal market conditions are disrupted. This can occur in situations such as natural disasters, pandemics, or other events that result in increased demand or limited supply. Price gouging is generally considered unethical and, in many jurisdictions, it is also illegal. Laws against price gouging vary by country and sometimes by state or region within a country. These laws typically aim to protect consumers from unfair and exploitative pricing practices during vulnerable times. The specific criteria for determining what constitutes price gouging can vary, but common factors include: significant price increase. The price charged is significantly higher than the pre-existing market price or the price charged by other sellers in the same market. Emergency or crisis situation. Price gouging typically occurs during times of crisis or emergency when demand exceeds supply, such as natural disasters, epidemics, or other disruptions. Essential goods or services. Price gouging often involves essential goods or services that are necessary for people's well-being or safety, such as food, water, medicine, shelter, or fuel. Lack of alternatives. Price gouging takes advantage of consumers' limited options during the crisis, where they may have no choice but to pay inflated prices. It's important to note that price increases in response to genuine changes in supply and demand, such as increased production costs or scarcity, are not necessarily considered price gouging. For example, if the cost of raw materials increases significantly or transportation becomes more expensive during a crisis, it may lead to legitimate price adjustments. To combat price gouging, many jurisdictions have implemented laws and regulations. These laws typically empower authorities to investigate and penalize businesses engaging in price gouging practices. Penalties can include fines, restitution for affected consumers, and injunctions to prevent further price gouging. If you suspect price gouging is occurring in your area, it is advisable to report it to the relevant consumer protection agency, such as a local consumer affairs department or a similar regulatory body that oversees fair trading practices. They can investigate the situation and take appropriate action. Thank you for watching the video and subscribe the channel.